Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A very warm welcome to yet another session of Quest, wherein we interview people from different walks of life on their spiritual journey. Today we have a very special guest, Shri Srinivas Mulugu ji, joining from Hyderabad. But let us first start with a small prayer. Sada Shiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmatacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavatyapta Dehaya Shri Dakshina Murtaye Namaha. Shri Srinivas ji is a telecom professional and has worked for over 18 years with several Fortune 500 companies such as Nokia, Siemens, Cisco, etc. And he was Asia head for Wipro's networking business and later India head for Nokia Siemens Internet Business Unit. At the age of 44, he took retirement from his active career to focus full time on his Adhyatmic interests. And this included journey across India from Mount Kailash to the banks of Ganga and Rishikesh and to the uh, shamshans of the famous Varanasi and several Shakti Pitas as well. And apart from these travels, he has also studied Vedantic works, including a selection of Upanishads, Yogasutras, Bhagavad Gita, and he is deeply into the study of the works of Sri Aurobindo. And he has been a follower of Sri Aurobindo since his teenage years. And at present, he is the vice chairman of Sri Aurobindo Society, Telangana State. And he is also member of Sri Aurobindo Society's national core group that sets direction for the organization. A very warm welcome to you, Srinivas ji, and we are very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Nitinji. Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So let me open with this question. This is the question that I open with all our guests who come. So, how did your journey into spirituality, into how did it begin into Adhyatma? What were your earliest inspirations and perhaps your parents or somebody else, your teachers or something? So how did it all begin for you?
Well, I was born into a family that had religious inclination per se, though they were not particularly strong into puja and other vyavaharas at that point in time. But there was a general belief system that guided us, and we had our gods and we had our puja room and we had our regular pujas. And I was kind of brought up with that as a part of my childhood life, and that became a part of me. And also my nature was such that Astika Bhava was already there in it. So it didn't need special effort to get into the groove. And those days, probably the life also gave more space for parents to create that atmosphere in the house. So that was how my initial years were, basically praying small shlokas and things to gods. And before going to school or college, you had a small 10-minute session in this, irrespective of what happened. And that kind of flowered as I grew up. And, all of us of my generation, there were some classical books that we had, like Autobiography of a Yogi was a big influence in our life. Similarly, a little bit of works of Ramana Maharshi. Swami Chinmayananda used to conduct a lot of Gita Yajnas during those times. So this was the general social situation also, which allowed us to keep that door very much open. And during my teenage years, one of my cousins opened to Sri Aurobindo and visited Pondicherry and all of that. So that's kind of how almost naturally the path opened for me. What was significant was that I was fortunate enough to come close to one or two of the direct disciples of Sri Aurobindo during those years. And they left a very lasting influence on my journey. And again, so that kind of shaped my readings, my study, a lot of those things. So it is almost a spontaneous and gradual evolution with no particular incident or event triggering the movement.
Wonderful, Srinivasji. You mentioned about the autobiography of a yogi being one of the first books on spirituality you read. I remember that my first book on spirituality and Hindu spirituality was this Living with Himalayan Masters by Swami Rama. I
Yes.
think I read it when I was in 11th or 12th, and that was a phase when I was an atheist trying to rediscover my Hindu roots, so to speak, and that had a tremendous influence. So,
Beautiful.
how was your first impressions when you read that autobiography of a yogi or any other book when you're first introduced to kind of a adhyatmic aspect beyond the day-to-day religious activities that we do?
In fact, it's interesting you should mention this book as well, because these days, when young seekers approach me, there are three books I kind of suggest to them to explore. One is Autobiography of a Yogi, another is Living with the Himalayan Masters, and the third is An Apprentice to a Himalayan Master by Sri M. That has also come out. So these kind of, this is a set of books that really open the other dimension of Hinduism and Sanatana Dharma. And really, as far as what I felt and how I felt, during the formative years, I had also read Rajagopalachari's Mahabharata and Ramayana, and all of us read Amarchitra Kadas in a big way. So the characters of rishis and munis and sages were there in our mind somewhere in the background. And when you read Autobiography of a Yogi or when you read Living with the Himalayan Masters, that tradition kind of comes alive. And you say, oh, this is not a lost tradition or this is not an esoteric tradition. It is possible here and now.
It's kind of deja vu to hear you because this was exactly my first impression. When I was reading the Living with Himalayan Masters, it is possible. It is not a myth. It is not a story that we were told when we were young, a story written in some text or something. It is living reality and it is there. So I think we have a similar experience as far as our
It is
introduction is concerned.
because it is really it brings the tradition alive, as you said. It's a living tradition, and that actually opens another door, because one, there is this ideal. Two, the ideal is alive now. Then the third becomes, oh, maybe I too can take some steps in that direction. That's the next consequence of this two steps.
Yes, yes, wonderfully put. I think that paves the way for developing Shraddha because Shraddha is completely missing today.
Mm.
You mentioned in earlier that you did not have a problem with developing Shraddha, but a lot of people have this problem because we have
Mm.
become so disconnected. So you mentioned that you were fortunate to meet two direct disciples of Aurobindo. Can you share more about that meeting? Who were they? How did you meet? And what was the lasting impression you had from them?
Oh, I would love to, because I mean, these are the ideals that I saw in my young age, and to different degrees, they all molded who I am today. So, for example, there was one Sri MP Panditji, Madhav Pandit. He was a gentleman who discovered Sri Aurobindo in his teenage years almost, and then joined Sri Aurobindo ashram when Sri Aurobindo was still in his physical body, and almost a decade or even longer before Sri Aurobindo left his body. And then he worked very, very closely with the mother, Sri Madhav Panditji. He himself was very articulate. He wrote over 130 books on the philosophy of Sri Aurobindo.
Wow,
And
it's in
so
English
all of
or
them are in English.
okay.
And where that became very significant was because as a teenager, his books actually gave me the philosophy of Sri Aurobindo. Because reading a synthesis of yoga of Sri Aurobindo or reading a Life Divine at 16 or 17, it would be bouncers. And also reading the number of volumes, because Sri Aurobindo has over 37, 38 volumes. It keeps increasing every year with more material being added of his own writings. Then the mother had over 17, 18 volumes. But what Madhav Panditji did was He took the essence of it and gave it in a way that could be understood by a teenager and applied it to a day-to-day situation. So that kind of really brought me to Sri Aurobindo in a very easy way, which many people, as I grew older, I realized that you go to Google, you say Sri Aurobindo, what are his books? And the top 3-4 books come up, starting with Life Divine as his magnum opus. So we order a magnum opus of Life Divine on Amazon. And within 3 pages, you kind of say, I think I'm not ready for it. Mostly that is the experience of many, many people I've seen. But Madhav Panditji's books helped me, and his personal guidance. And to speak of him, probably I would need a long, long time. But all I can say is he was a rishi of the Upanishads who just walked out of the pages. He embodied in him the teaching, and he embodied in him the realizations of very, very high planes. And when you were with him, it was a vibration that gave you more than probably any interaction. When you meditated with him, it was a different, such people, they carry our consciousness with them to the higher planes when you meditate with them.
True.
And another person whom I briefly interacted, but also heard so much and had his darshan multiple times was Shri Champaklalji, who was the personal attendant of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. He again spent his entire life, and he was a Siddha Purusha. We could have his darshan during the visit to ashram, and many times I had his darshan. Then there is a person who is with us, very, very much active in Sri Aurobindo's and mother's work today, by name Sri Vijay Bhai. He stays in the ashram, and he has been a big mentor and guide for me. And he runs many of the. His motto has been how to bring spirituality to practical day-to-day works that we do. So if you take a poetry, what does it mean to have spirituality in poetry? If you talk about sculpture, what does it mean to have spirituality in sculpture? If you're working with youth, what does it mean to bring spirituality to youth? So he was a big influence, and he still is a big influence and a guide and a mentor to me in much of the work that I do. So these are some of the people, all of them with direct access and mentor and in mentorship of the mother in Sri Aurobindo, and spiritual wealth poured upon them. To receive it from them itself was a big grace for me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Since Sri Aurobindo's work itself is huge and voluminous, so when did you develop interest to study more traditional texts like Upanishads, Gita, Yogasutras, and in a more? Have you studied it in a formal manner, or it is more of a self-study? How did you develop interest in doing this?
So here is the interesting thing. I'll talk about the theoretical aspect, and then we'll come to the practical aspects also. Sri Aurobindo's yoga is known as the integral yoga. He has synthesized many streams and brought them together. My own belief system and understanding of Sanatana Dharma is that Sanatana Dharma is not a static entity. It is a dynamic entity. That is why we have Smriti, Shruti, Smriti, Purana, because with age you keep modifying the outer manifestation of the scripture, but the essence continues to be delivered. Today, after reading Sri Aurobindo and after studying the traditional texts, my understanding is that Sri Aurobindo is one of those yogis who has come to expand the frontiers of Sanatana Dharma in some way, in a way that is, first provide it in a way that is relevant to this context and this age, because today what he has written is accessible to anybody who understands the most dominant language of this era, which is English. Mm-hmm. So you have a direct access to a realized soul and what the essence of the realizations of Sanatana Dharma are, first thing. The second thing is what he has written in some, by some very learned persons of the traditional methods also, they call him a Purna Advaiti. They call his yoga, in addition to Purna Yoga, they call him as Purna Advaita. Why do they say that? Because he has taken the concept of Advaita and he says, in fact, by the way, it would be of very interest to many of our audience to know that in the early years, Sri Aurobindo called integral yoga as Advaita yoga.
Oh.
And before he coined the term integral yoga, he called it as Advaita yoga. He called his sadhana as Advaita sadhana. But he also had some differences, and this is what is interesting. In his works, you find a very insightful line. He says, our method, our approach uses the method of Vedanta with the aim of the Tantra. So what does it mean? The method of Vedanta, which talks about vichara, viveka, vairagya, which talks about detachment, which talks about renunciation, which talks about all of these things. And interestingly, he combines it with the aim of Tantra. What is the aim of Tantra? The aim of Tantra is realizing God through bhukti, through enjoyment, through while passing through going through the process, but receiving the highest import. And he combines the two. So what does it actually mean? It actually brings it down to the opening line of Isha Upanishad. So let me contextualize it differently.
Mm-hmm.
The approach of Vedanta in its true traditional form says the world is Maya, the world is Mithya. So try to focus on realizing the God while understanding that you are dealing with Maya and Mithya all around you. And how that was interpreted in a practical purport was to turn away from the world and seek the divine outside of this world in one way. Renunciation became essential and external renunciation became a prominent part of it. Then the question becomes, what about Ishavasyam idam sarvam? What about this material world? Is it not supposed to be God? And if everybody who realizes the highest ideal turns away from the God, then suffering will remain permanently in this world. How does the suffering of the world change? Going to the classical problems that are addressed by philosophy of God. What about evil and suffering?
Mm-hmm.
This is where Sri Aurobindo says the detachment one needs to develop is completely internal, number one. Number two, turning away from this world as Mithya and Maya should only be an internal process, not an external process. The world and the pleasures of the world are given to you for your rightful enjoyment, as Ishavasya Upanishad tells us. And realization of God in this world while enjoying this world is Tantra, the fulfillment of this. So in a way, in the synthesis, you see many streams coming in Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. So in a way, it also is a very convenient philosophy, because one of the reasons my cousin and I joke saying that the only reason we didn't go to Himalayas is because there is no hot water available there. So for us, it gives us an opportunity to pursue Viveka, with Vairagya. We pursue all the highest lofty ideals in the comfort of air-conditioned rooms, in the comfort of eating, mangoes during the summer. All of that is continuing while we keep remembering, this also is given by God, but we enjoy it fully. So this is how we have been able to kind of synthesize his approach. On the practical side of it, much of what I read in Sri Aurobindo's yoga prepared me for receiving Vedanta formally, because the themes are there underlying the sadhana. Both the Astika Advaita in terms of accepting the dualities and the God and the love of God and the beauty of God, and all of that also has become a part of me. The looking at self and trying to go beyond the physicality of our own existence, trying to watch as Sakshi Bhava the emotions and thoughts that manifest in us, trying to reach at a higher stage of Achanchala Bhava, Achanchala Sakshi Bhava, trying to make it a part of me while continuing to do our work in the Karma Yogic approach. So all of these were already the key elements were built into the system. And about a decade ago, a little less than a decade ago, I chanced upon the Sivananda Ashrama's Yoga Vedanta course. Mm-hmm. So promptly I went and spent 2 months in Rishikesh at Sivananda Ashram.
Oh, wonderful.
So the long answer to the short question is the formal part began there, because till then I had scattered knowledge pieces which were not integrated. Mm-hmm. But there, you sat with teachers whose whole life is dedicated to the pursuit of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta in particular. So we learned Bhagavad Gita, we learned Yogasutras, we learned Bhakti Sutras, then we talked about Bhagavad Gita, we had classes which were conducted in a formal way.
And this is for 2 months?
For 2 months.
Okay.
In fact, this is one of the best fountains of Vedantic knowledge for people of any age to receive, because the course is structured in a very beautiful way. It is a free course given to any person. I would say mostly they encourage men, most men. And in my class, we had boys of 21 and we had elders of 65. And I was somewhere in between in my 40s at that time. And the courses are taught in a very structured manner. And that was a beautiful introduction to Vedanta for me. And that helped me on the formal journey. And once I did that, I said, let me understand this more. Then I came back and I did an MA philosophy from Osmania University. To
Oh,
really,
wonderful.
I mean, again, it was a quest to synthesize all of this and harmonize it and put the structure in a way, you know. Then I said, okay, now I know Vedanta, but let me understand the entire philosophy of, the Indian philosophy in the right way. So I spent 2 years doing an MA philosophy.
So you must have studied Das Gupta, Hiranna, and others while studying for MA philosophy.
Radhakrishna,
Ah.
Radhakrishna. Yeah, absolutely.
So did any of the darshanas catch hold of you to spend more time on their primary text, going beyond the the overview provided by Radhakrishna and others?
The main contribution of studying the darshanas for me was actually taking the 20 years of learning and systematizing them. Because otherwise, it was a somewhat of the approach of a quack. You had pieces of knowledge that were not synthesized and harmonized in a structured way. So, for example, what Sri Krishna talks about in Gita about Sankhya and yoga was something I had been hearing since my teenage. But the question always was, oh, what did Sankhya actually say?
True.
And then, even in my preceding years, the separation of Purusha and Prakriti is one of the most foundational steps of any serious yoga sadhana. To know what the Sankhya talked about and understand the 24 principles, understand how it all came together, it helped me in synthesizing this knowledge and structuring it in a way. And of course, then you talk about the Vedanta itself as a darsana and all the benefits that you get out of that. Except for probably Upanishads, I did not step back into either Vaisheshika or any other, of course, the Patanjali Yogasutras is there. That is a traditional text that I have studied in a serious, somewhat of a serious manner. But beyond probably the Upanishads and the Yogasutras, I didn't go into the details in other, because for me, probably Nyaya did not hold as much, calling, because I'm more a seeker first, and then a seeker of the realization first, and then the academic part, rather than the academic aspect first and the seeker later. So these two, the Upanishads and the Yoga Sutras, yes, in their formal, in their original text, I did study.
Wonderful, wonderful. So let me ask questions related to your corporate career. So you have been in, I think, some 18 plus years, right? If I'm not wrong, in
Yes.
various companies and mostly in a leadership position. So it is a two-part question. What I have is one, how did your spiritual journey help you as a leader, help you in your leadership roles in the corporate world? And two, uh, why did you decide to quit? What was the trigger, so to speak, that made you to take up such a decision to quit a full-time career so early, take a retirement at 44 and focus on completely on Adhyatma?
You say early, but honestly, once you change gears, you realize how late it is. but we'll come to that. We'll come to that. So on the corporate career side, it was very interesting on multiple ways. One is, I really was fortunate that I worked for some of the best companies, and just to, I mean, while there was a lot of beautiful, I mean, my core field is that of internet engineering. That is where I was the early years of my career. I was blessed enough that when I was doing my master's itself, I was guided by some people and internet was just being born. So I could probably be counted as one of the first 500 people in the world who started building internet, maybe even the first 300. That was a time when internet had not yet arrived in India in the early 90s. And when it arrived as those modems which were doing a 9.6 kbps, keying core noises and trying to connect and dropping, faster. Every 10 minutes they would drop the line. That was the time I was in the US working on very, very strong telecom networks, building the internet infrastructure for America Online and all of that. So I was very fortunate. Many times we think we have achieved a lot, but the truth is when we look back, it was the circumstances, it was the people, it was the opportunity, it was many unknown things that guide you to your life's journey. And one really can't take credit for all of it in a personal sense. It was a wave that I happened to catch. And subsequently in my managerial roles also, much of the career was based on that wave. Yes, those days it was the modem, and the days I was leaving, it was how do you do Wi-Fi based internet connectivity in remote parts of the country as well. I mean, that all that changed was the medium, the technology remained the same, And I was also fortunate that I was very young and I enjoyed thoroughly my corporate career. Thoroughly. One day I would be in Florida, kayaking in the Keys over the weekend. Another day you would be in Silicon Valley. I happened to have, transcontinental responsibilities in various roles. So sometime you're having dinner on the, around the Opera House in Sydney, and and it was a beautiful journey, and it gave me a lot of covered from Middle East to Korea to Australia to all of these countries, Germany. So one really can't say I have anything to complain about. It was a joyful journey. It was a beautiful, fulfilling journey. I was able to publish a couple of books on the technologies at that time that are still, surprisingly, they're still available on Amazon. Even though it's been 10 years since the last one was published, it seems there is still some validity to it. So it was a very fulfilling journey, I was able to work through. What is a common thread across all of this journey was that two elements that stand out. One was that whether I was in an individual contributor role or whether I was in a managerial role, whether I was in a leadership role, one pursuit that was relentless was whatever one did, do it to perfection. That yoga karmashu kausalam principle was there. And fundamentally, it probably came from an early understanding that, listen, you are accountable for what you do. That is the karmic principle of life. Chalta hai is not an option.
True.
Chalta hai can never be an option. Jugaad is never an option. And I told this to my teams as well. I said, the only value to your signature is what you give to yourself. If you do something to perfection, you put your signature, you get value to what you do. You don't do it to perfection, you squander your opportunities and you put your signature, you are squandering your own career. So this quest for perfection, even if it means working overnight and all of that was there, but also that in some ways that made me somewhat infamous in the organizations. And also some of the spouses of my employees did not particularly like me, as I realized later, because the other form of that is you become a tyrant, because you're trying to push people constantly to deliver. And later people realize it as well, even though they think you're a tyrant when they work for you. 5 years later, when you meet and they say, sir, the best work of my career I produced under you, you know that they're also happy about it in retrospect. And I know some careers were built purely on the work done and the documents we produced together, So that is one aspect. The second aspect is being able to be compassionate while you were still being so productive and trying to do that. That never failed in my case. And that again, I attribute to the understanding of karma, the understanding of Vedanta, the understanding of all of us are one at some level, that first, whatever Aham Brahmasmi mean at a higher level, at one level, it also means that we are all in some way interconnected and we are one. And what happens to one impacts the other, and what we do to one impacts the other. So these themes kind of intertwined in somewhat contradictory ways, apparently. but they also reflected who I was. And perhaps today I would integrate better having the gray hair that I do than I did in my career at that time, you know.
So, what triggered you to uh, take the retirement?
um, Perhaps it was the early books that you and I spoke about. So for me, this wasn't actually, as much as I enjoyed my career and as much as I thrived, there was a background already built inside of me, as is the case with many of us who make this transition or making our balance. You know, it's either a transition or a balance. Either you switch over from one career to a pursuit of spiritual life more, you know, strongly, or you try to balance the outer work and the spiritual life. And there are thousands and lakhs of people doing that today. So all of this comes when there is an inner journey that is parallelly going on. So at 25, I was almost certain I would retire by 35. And my career started at 24. After all the masters, you know, doing an MBA, doing an MTech, I only started at 24. But 25, I was clear I wanted to retire at 35, and people actually used to make fun of me. And some of them still do, but today in a different way. But those days, you know, they were definitely sure that I would never step out of my corporate career, particularly since they were all together with me while I was thriving. So it was more of a changing the track very seamlessly. I wanted to. I had no clue how. I had no planning. I had no idea of the details. But the seed was there that career, as much as it means, is only a means to earning, and spiritual life was my real journey, as opposed to I'm going to prove who I am by becoming a certain entrepreneur or a CEO of a company or any of that. That never somehow took hold inside my psyche. For me, probably the goal was that realizing the self is finally the prize that I am after, rather than trying to I mean, one of my uh, one of the important transition points in my life was choosing to come back to India from the US when I was doing extremely well in the US.
Mhm.
Having stayed there till 2098 and been there for 10 years, many of my friends mocked me, surprised at me and my decision. Ki, you have everything going for you. Why are you starting all over again without a professional network, without financial backing, without, I mean, any logical person would have said exactly what my caring and well meaning friends told me at that time. If you want to retire early, you should stay in America longer and earn more rather than try to come back and start with zero professional network and zero and a 90% pay cut, which was actually the case in numbers. But thank God that the, you know, the Sri Aurobindo uses a phrase called the logic of the infinite. You know, that doesn't apply to the logic of the finite. Somehow that didn't happen, because many of my friends who were planning to come back are still in the US, and I have come back and I have yet retired. And how it happened is only a pure play of divine grace. None of my planning worked out the way I planned. None of it. But when you're asking the infinite to take care of you, they take care of you in their own very interesting ways, you know.
That's a nice way to put logic of the infinite. So, moving forward, you have traveled across the length and breadth of the country, visiting various tirthams and kshetrams from the ghats of the Varanasi. I was there, I think, 2 years back. I think the if I have to point out single most thing that I loved there was not the Ganga Aarti on the Ganges, but it was the lighted fires in the ghat beside the where the Ganga Aarti happens. So you have how has these travels to various Shakti Peeths, to Mount Kailash, Rishikesh, and how has it influenced your understanding of the pulse of India or the pulse of Sanatan Dharma, so to speak? And so tell us about your experience.
We'll speak about a couple of places and then we will speak about the other aspect of the travel, which is the people. So, like you, my experience at Benares um, was the cremation ghats. And this was a very unexpected revelation because I had only gone to spend a week at Benares at the age of 29 when I was not yet married, and nobody asked me to do so. I just happened to want to spend a week at Benares because it is a known place of religion and spirituality. And one afternoon, I accidentally just ended up at the ghat. And I just sat there. And for 3-4 hours, I just sat there. Luckily, those days, mobiles weren't what they are today. So I had no distraction. I had just the Ganga, the other side of Ganga, which is basically an open sky and open land, and the celebration of death. That was going on 1, 2, 3, again and again. And luckily, since I had just gone with this crazy endeavor, none of my friends wanted to join me. So I was alone. So nobody was there to talk. Nobody was there to pull me out. And many of these things that happen by chance, I attributed to grace because something in me has been seeking, and I guess someone above there decided to tap me on the head to look at life in a different way. And that afternoon probably changed me in a way that probably it can never be put back in the original context ever again. And I went back, I wrote a poem about what was happening, and it was a very, very profound moment. I do not know if it will be equally impactful if I had planned it, but certainly I still see there is a significant, after that many times I've gone back with friends and with relatives, but I would still encourage any seeker to go without an agenda to Benares and randomly allocate a few hours to the cremation ghats and just write down a journal because it really stirs something inside of us. And I can completely relate to your experience because it is almost a journey we seem to have shared together.
I only had a few minutes, and actually I was there for an event, and I was there in Varanasi only for a single night. For the one evening, 2 hours, I covered maximum. And through the boat ride during that Ganga Aarti time in the evening when it was dark, I took the boat ride. And in that boat ride, I also watched the burning fires from a distance. But it was wonderful. It just, I think, 5 minutes. 5 minutes experience was worth many hours of.
Certainly. Certainly. I can imagine. I can visualize it.
So yeah, so then tell us about other places.
The other place where I had a very, again, I share this more to inspire others to try and make these explorations rather than to kind of give any profound insights of myself. It is not about that at all, because those aren't yet there, as you can see. But there are these are the hidden wealth in the journey. You know, in those video games, you have these hidden places. So I'm pointing out which are the hidden places I chanced upon. Maybe some others can as well. A Manasarovar. Sorry. All I will say is, we say some countries are karma bhumi. You know, India is a place where Sanatana Dharma is so profound that probably this is where a sadhana bhumi, a tapo bhumi. I felt Kailash Manasarovar is a region which is mantra bhumi. The hidden truths and the layers part when you go there and you do sadhana. The progress, the realizations are rapid. They're beings that we aspire to and pray to walk the earth. With a little bit of effort, I believe they can part the veil and give profound insights and realizations. I'd rather leave it at that layer of explanation than go deeper than that. Today, it is possible to go and spend more time there. When I went 20 years ago, it was not possible to stay there for 10 days comfortably. Today, it is possible. Today is possible to reach there. So any seekers who are listening to this, if you have any sadhanas that are of traditional nature or modern nature, one can always plan to go there, do it for 20 days, do it for 40 days. Yes, it needs a little more effort than just a tourist visit, but it is possible today. So I would definitely encourage seekers to go there. And as an extension to that, each place has the vibration and the capacities, the beauty, the spiritual power that is waiting to be unveiled and received. All we have to go there not as tourists, but as pilgrims and sadhaks. Wait there upon the deity with seeking aspiration and a little bit of inward turning, preferably alone. Then I think there is a lot that every important place, the gods are waiting to shower their blessings upon us. They're just waiting to, like a grandmother or a grandfather, thrust something into our hand when we visit them. With such love, all of these gods are waiting for us. We just have to go there, tune into the frequency, remove the disturbances at the physical and the subtle physical level, and do a little bit of sadhana. They're just waiting to shower their grace upon us. Whether it is the Siddhapitas, whether it is Jyotirlingas, whether it is Shaktipitas and Upashaktipitas. This has been my journey, to go to places and just wait upon the grace. And one cannot define a calendar for that. One has to give it a little more time than what we normally do in this day and age. But for a sadhak, if we are trying to transcend time and space at the mystical level, let us at least transcend time and space at the physical level. Let us not go in a hurry. Let us give the God as much time as they need. They're waiting to come to us. And also, I have found it very helpful when we spend that time and space. There are seekers like us who kind of come to these places. And when we learn about their journeys, it can be very inspirational. It can be very insightful. I have benefited a lot, as much receiving from the gods and goddesses and the gurus themselves, as I have benefited from other seekers whom I exchange notes with, whom I talk to, who talk about their sadhana, who are kind enough to talk about their sadhana, and who are kind enough to bless us silently. That also, all this can happen only if we remove the time constraints that normally burden us when we go to such places. So this is my experience of Sanatana Dharma and its throbbing truth waiting at every place that we can really go out, go out.
Have you been to Arunachaleshwara? Arunachala, has it?
Yes.
Wonderful. I have heard so many accounts of completely different kind of experience there.
The silence there is so tangible even today. The presence there is so tangible even today.
Wonderful, Srinivas ji. So we are almost coming to an end of this session. I want to ask one final question. What would be your advice to those who want to start exploring the works of Sri Aurobindo? I think this is perhaps very important because a lot of people, you only noted a while back, people buy Divine Life, go through 3 pages, and then they keep it forever and ever. It is kept close. So, if one were to start their journey into the works of Aurobindo, from where should they start? Do you think, do you have any ideas or that how they could go about systematically?
Surely. Before I go into Sri Aurobindo's books themselves, I have a general observation to make about how to approach reading spiritual literature. See, in the Dhyana Shloka of Bhagavad Gita, it is written, Advaita Amrita Varshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambika Tvamanu Sandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshini. This is the secret of reading spiritual literature. This cannot be approached through Nastika Bhava. This cannot be approached through intellectual gymnastics method. It cannot be approached through, oh, I will see what he has to say today. So those who are not ready to approach with a Dehi approach will find it difficult to understand spiritual literature, number one. Two, even if they understand, they would probably receive only the marginal benefit of it, not the mystical essence of it. It has been my experience studying works of saints and sages, and not only Sri Aurobindo and Mother, that when we take up the study even of a philosophy or the life story of saints and sages, and we do it with Astika Bhava and we do it with a Dehi Dehi Bhava, they actually come and bless us. They actually come and bless us. It could be the biography of any saint. He is not past, he is present. His consciousness is active in the earth atmosphere today, be rest assured. And when we read it, we are almost invoking his presence and connecting to his consciousness. And often they do come and give their blessings if we are capable and open enough and sensitive enough. It can be through a meditation. It can be through an unfolding of life in an unexpected dimension. It can be through a protection that is given to us in an unexpected material aspect. It can be through a vision in a sleep. It can be in 100 different ways. So the first approach while reading Sri Aurobindo is to open to Sri Aurobindo, and I would emphasize the Mother. Many people ignore the Mother as if, okay, she is somebody who has come, let us keep her on the side. Let me see what he has to say. The important line that comes to my mind is, Mother said, without me, he is unmanifest. And without him, I exist not. Sri Aurobindo in 1926 itself, while he was in the body, he retired into a room to do his sadhana, and he said, all my blessings, all my guidance, all the difficulties you have, write to the Mother, and she will give you the Shakti who will pass on whatever is required to you. So they are twin gurus that can't be separated. Somewhere both have to be accepted together. When we are reading Sri Aurobindo and trying to understand and receive him, we have to acknowledge the presence of the Mother and the grace of the Mother. It is Ishvara Shakti. That is the attitude. We don't play to Shiva and ignore Parvati. It is Ishvara Shakti, which are twin, Ardhanarishvara Bhava almost. So this is one important thing I bring up, Nitinji, for two reasons. Because I know for a fact that many of our listeners will be with Astika Bhava. They are not people who do it for intellectual gymnastics. I know this very well. So I'm able to very openly bring it up, which otherwise I probably wouldn't do if I'm talking on a stage with 300 people, I wouldn't emphasize this point much. I would directly go, read this, read this, read this. But here we have a group of seekers who are all trying to receive spiritual force and energy and all working as diligently as they can for spiritual and self-realization. So this is a golden key that I'm just opening and placing before everyone who is listening to this. Coming to Sri Aurobindo's works themselves, there is a small book called The Basis of Yoga, which is barely 100 pages, a very thin, small booklet. It is not even a book. Mm-hmm. It's called Basis of Yoga. That has been my standard recommendation to almost everyone of any age group to start with. And I know how much people have benefited, irrespective of who their primary guru is or what their primary path is. A professor that I had given it to when I visited him the next time showed me the Basis of Yoga, in which practically every line was underlined. So that is a beautiful book that one can begin with. It gives a good way of applying spiritual principles in daily life. And that is what Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga is. Then, for readings more on core aspects of Sri Aurobindo, one can start with essays on the Gita, because many of us are familiar with the Bhagavad Gita. And by taking up essays on the Gita, it works like a bridge between the traditional knowledge systems and Sri Aurobindo's knowledge system. Because there are important differences. Like I told you, Sri Aurobindo believes that the matter should be transformed with divine light embodied into the cells. Daivatva to the physical cell level. He doesn't believe matter should be abandoned. In fact, when Sri Aurobindo left his body, his room was glowing with golden light of the supermind. For 3 to 4 full days, it is documented. Because he brought down that higher light of consciousness so that man can become a being as superior to man as man is superior to chimpanzee today. He says that is the next stage of evolution. The Darwinian evolution hasn't stopped. What is the key to unlocking the Darwinian evolution? It is yoga of Sanatana Dharma. Darwin can't say, what can I do, Mr. Darwin? How do I become the next man? He will say, you don't do anything. Science will do it. Nature will do it. Sri Aurobindo says, no. Man will grow through sadhana. And through sadhana, you are not meant to abandon the world. You are supposed to be in the world and bring the divine light where Ishavasyam Idam Sarvam becomes true in the very literal sense of the word, not in the figurative sense of the word. So Bhagavad Gita can become the bridge. Then there is a beautiful collection called Letters on Yoga. 4 volumes are there. Particularly the second volume onwards one can start. This is again the letters he wrote on how to apply spirituality on day-to-day affairs. And there are theoretical aspects also in those letters. So if you want the theoretical aspects of philosophy, start with the first volume. If you want to understand how to be spiritual and how to live a spiritual life in 21st century, start with Letters on Yoga volume 2. After essays on the Gita and letters on yoga, one can take up other work like Synthesis of Yoga. Synthesis of Yoga is where Sri Aurobindo writes about the importance of taking each path of yoga to its logical culmination, and then he brings all the 3 streams of Bhakti, Jnana and Karma Yoga and shows us how each of them gives you the benefits of the other yogas also. He doesn't dichotomize it saying Bhakti doesn't belong in Jnana or Jnana doesn't belong. He synthesizes all of them. And then on top of that, he wrote another section called Yoga of Self-Perfection, which is actually talking about after you accomplish the goal of the existing yogas, what is the future of humanity? So one of the lines which is controversial about Sri Aurobindo, he says that my yoga begins where other yogas end. What does he mean by that? He says, once you have attained the self-realization and you have become Jivan Mukta, your work is actually, your real work for humanity is just beginning. He says the job of a Jivan Mukta is not to wait here till your body withers away and then you go and merge in the Brahman. He says such Jivan Muktas are actually the people who are taking humanity to the next level in evolution. They have to remain here, embody the highest virtues, and then go forward. That is explained in Yoga of Self-Perfection. In that Yoga of Self-Perfection, every attribute of what we consider as the realizations of the saints, he elaborates it. So for example, Trikala Jnana. He writes how a Trikala Jnani looks at life because he himself was a Trikala Jnani. So here you have in English how time and space appear to a person who is self-realized. And how does one take advantage of it and how does one do sadhana in exceeding time and space? So this is Yoga of Self-Perfection. And then comes Life Divine, which is more a philosophical treatise that addresses all the philosophical questions from his point of view. We all know in the traditional approach to be called a philosophy, you need to fulfill a certain set of requirements about reconciling the individual, the cosmic and the God. You know, how do you reconcile the 3 in a non-contradictory way? How do you explain unity and multiplicity? How do you explain static and dynamic? All these traditional frameworks, how he addresses all of that in Life Divine. So my kind request to anyone interested in Sri Aurobindo is to wait for 10 years before you read Life Divine, after you start studying Sri Aurobindo. First understand what he has said about what you need to do to become self-realized. That is what is of primary interest. Then you take up life divine after you understand his approach and philosophy.
Thank you, Srinivasji, for such an elaborate answer to the question. And the whole interview, it was extremely enjoyable, extremely insightful, and you brought in perspective, theoretical, experiential, and from different dimensions, different angles. So, on the behalf of entire Advaita Academy and all our viewers, I thank you for doing this interview and sharing your thoughts with all of us.
Thank you, Nitinji. It is a good opportunity because rarely do I get an opportunity to synthesize the diverse aspects. The religious aspect, the traditional Vedantic aspect, Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, and how to synthesize all of that. This is a good opportunity you have given me to bring all of these themes together. And hopefully this will inspire more people to take up any of these aspects of towards self-realization, because that is what the goal, that is what we are all trying to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Srinivasji. Yes, with this, we come to a conclusion of yet another session. And please don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We also have a Facebook discussion group. You can also join that. So with this, we conclude this session. Shri Guru Namaha.